When we're first introduced to King in the first episode of the Owl House, it is through a joke. Luce arrives in the Isles and has no idea what she wants to do, has no idea where she is, has no idea how to comprehend this very strange and mysterious world, so the first thing she wants to do is get back home, even though she did not much like home. Because of this, she makes quite an interesting deal with Ida, the Owl Lady. This deal stipulates that Ida will help Luce return to her realm if Luce, in turn, does something for King. This strange ferret fox creature who claims to be the king of demons. Luce has to go and fetch King's crown. So she does, and she risks a lot to do so, only to discover it's a crown made of cardboard from a rip-off Burger King. And this is our first indication as to what we should think of his claims of grandeur and dominance. Since this first episode, Luce has mostly treated these extravagant, grandiose claims with a sort of benevolent detachment. We all have that friend who has their delusions about who they are and what they're going to accomplish, and it's clear that these things mean a lot to the friend, and they're very much invested in these crazy dreams and ideas about themselves. So we don't want to hurt this friend, so we just don't really say anything to deflate their aspirations. That is exactly what Luce's relationship with King reminds me of at the start of the Owl House. By the midpoint of Season 1, this also kind of describes King's relationship with himself. He has kind of accepted that his ideas of grandeur are just delusions, that he will never achieve the power and the majesty that he really wants for himself. Nonetheless, even though we have gotten some insight into King's character, we know very little about his past. And I do believe that knowing more about that would shed some more light on who King is and what he actually wants and what his actual mindset is. So I do hope that we get a lot more about King in the upcoming episodes of the Owl House, including the episode that is going to air after I release this episode of my show, that episode of the Owl House being Echoes of the Past. Wouldn't it be strange if King actually had been a grand demon and this was not just some bizarre delusion on his part? In Freud's Mourning and Melancholy, he talks about melancholy mirroring mourning in a lot of ways. But unlike mourning, it doesn't necessarily ebb. Freud describes it as the shadow of mourning falling upon the ego. In short, we mourn the loss of a specific person or a specific idea or concept, but melancholy cannot be attached completely to one object. It lacks that specificity, and this is what afflicts King. It is true that yes, he misses his old identity, if indeed we are to believe his old identity was something grander than what the show has demonstrated so far. But what he misses is a little more intangible than that. He misses the respect and authority that identity gave him. It is so tied up with his conception of himself that now that he has lost that identity, he doesn't really know who he as a being is anymore. He's very confused. Is it possible for him to regain his old identity? It might be, but the question we might ask ourselves is, do we want King to regain his old identity? Because it is not a guarantee that this old identity was completely better in a moral sense than who he has become. This old identity, if it did exist, was one of great power and dominance. But there's some darkness in that, I believe. Some less savory aspects that might not be as warm and cuddly as the king we know and love. There might be a lot of dark secrets in his past that King does not want to discuss with anyone. I love episodes of TV shows that take a relatively lighthearted character and reveal an aspect of that character that completely changes one's perception of that character. Not in a shock, horror way, not in a way that revels in subversion for the sake of subversion, but in a way that shines a lot of light on the character as a whole. My favorite example of this is with Faye in Cowboy Bebop. We learn so much about Faye as the show goes on, and we see how her identity has been taken from her, and how she has been manipulated and abused by other people, by forces outside her control. And then, as we finally approach the end of the show, we get a video of the carefree, happy-go-lucky, kind-spirited kid she used to be before all the trauma. And after we see that tape, it's just silence. These characters are normally always taking jabs at each other. They care about each other, but they are the kind of people who love lightly mocking each other. But there's none of that here. It's just quiet. They know the significance of that. I'm not expecting the Owl House to go quite that far, but I would like something along those lines. Demons in this world are not innately bad, it seems like, but that doesn't mean they're innately good either. Disney told Dana Terrace to tone down the Boshin horror of the Owl House for season 1, but she has said that season 2 is going to be more like her vision for the show. So, with that more unfiltered perspective on this world, there is going to be a lot of darkness. And King's past identity, whatever that may be, is probably going to be a major component of that darkness. So yeah, we might be left kind of in melancholy silence when we find out the truth about King, if it does have that kind of darkness to it. The official description of Echoes of the Past says that King's delusions of grandeur are going to lead our group, Ida, Hootie, Lilith, and Luce, to a mysterious island. Now, this could be a very fun, lighthearted, silly episode, considering how silly of a character King has been, but I hope it's not. I hope that they really dig into the pathos at the heart of his character. I really hope that we see how his absurd justifications for his behavior and his absurdly overinflated views of himself do not come out of nowhere, that there is a basis to them. I want to see more about his feelings of loss and ennui and dissatisfaction, and there are indications that we might in fact get this. Think about the credits that end each episode. They're done in this very nice, ancient Egyptian-inspired style. A lot of people have said that these credits remind them of the opening of The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. I agree, and anything that reminds me of The Wind Waker is good by me. It is my favorite Zelda game. And I actually did a video on it way back when I was like 17 or so. So if you're interested in that video on The Wind Waker, go and check it out. But back to King and back to the Owl House. When we examine these end titles, we see King staring longingly out to sea, wistfulness in his eyes, and behind him we see a majestic and powerful and possibly furious-looking demon. Now, it is true that perhaps this doesn't mean anything, that it's just King's idea of himself as this majestic, regal beast. But I'd like to think there's more to it than that. Perhaps this is King's old form, and we are going to see more of that as the show progresses. Or perhaps it's one of King's relatives. Perhaps someone who was very close to him was an actual king of demons and had that majestic, powerful form, and King lost them for some reason and wants to try and carry on that legacy. I admit I have absolutely no evidence supporting this whatsoever, but it's a nice idea, and I wouldn't be surprised if they took it. It's certainly, I think, more likely than there just being nothing more to King than what we already know. Perhaps he just wants to honor the legacy of someone else. I want to know more about why he feels these feelings of hurt and anguish and anxiety and a bit of arrogance, a bit of desire to present himself as being much more than what he actually is. What is the story behind that? Because I do think there is a story there, and I do think the Owl House as a show would be benefited by telling that story. It doesn't necessarily have to be that King really is this majestic, magnificent being and then something happened to him, although it could be the case. But there has to be more there than what we already know. Aside from the Golden Guard, there are only two characters in the Owl House whose stories we don't know at this point. Now, one of these characters is the Emperor Baelos himself. I like Baelos. I love Matthew Rhys, his voice actor, and I think Baelos is very creepy and extremely enigmatic, but I want to know more about him. I don't think he would necessarily make a great final villain based only on what we know about him at this point. He's too abstract. At this point, he seems more like a video game final boss than an actual fully realized character. I'm not saying they need to make him sympathetic, but I would like to see them humanize him and demonstrate these different sides of his character and demonstrate what exactly he wants, and more importantly, why exactly he wants that and what has driven him to want that. I'm really interested to see where they go with Baelos. But I am also interested to see in what direction they end up taking King's character. Even Hooty has gotten significant character enlargement at this point. I say enlargement because it's not necessarily growth or development. Perhaps those are part of it, but what I mean by enlargement is that we get to know that there is more to a certain character than we have hitherto realized. These elements were there all along, we just didn't recognize them. If Hooty can get something like that, then I definitely think King should. I mean, Hooty was originally this very annoying comic relief character. His main trait was being annoying, but now he has bonded with Lilith, a very strange but fruitful friendship, and I'm interested to see what happens with that going forward. But more than that, I'm interested in King. How did he meet Ida? Why did he become so attached to Ida? Why is he so obsessed with the idea of himself as this almighty, all-powerful demon? I want to know. I believe King knows the answers to these questions, and I hope we, the audience, learn them as well. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can and you want to see more videos like this. Keep watching The Owl House. It's a clever, thoughtful show. I love how they're steadily building out this world through the characters. These characters were pretty good when we were first introduced to them. I liked Ida immediately, but they've become deepened to such an extent as the show has progressed, and that's really exciting. I can't wait to see where they go from here. So anyway, tune in soon for my next analysis. It will be coming soon. Promise you that. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.